The day my brother showed up at my apartment with a folder full of documents and a look on his face like he was doing me a favor, I should have closed the door. I didn't though. I made him coffee. I moved my laptop off the kitchen table so he'd have room to spread everything out. I even said, "Sure, walk me through it," because that's what I'd always done. That's what our family expected me to do. His name is Brendan. He's 3 years older than me, and for most of my life I believed that because he was the firstborn, he was somehow wiser, more deserving of the benefit of the doubt. My parents never said that out loud, but they didn't have to. It was in the way my dad's eyes lit up when Brendan walked into a room. It was in the way my mom described his half-finished renovation projects as ambitious. While my fully paid-off condo was barely worth mentioning, I'd learned early on not to read too much into it. Some families just have a favorite, and sometimes the favorite isn't you. I'm Cassidy. I'm 31. I work as a licensed insolvency trustee in Hamilton, Ontario, which means I spend my days helping people understand what debt actually does to a life. I know what a promissory note looks like. I know the difference between a secured creditor and an unsecured one. I know what a personal guarantee means the moment you sign your name to one. I know all of this, and I still almost didn't see it coming, because it was my brother asking. The folder he brought had 4 documents inside. One was a loan agreement between Brendan and a private lender I'd never heard of. A numbered company registered in Alberta. The loan was for $340,000. The interest rate was 14.9%, variable. The term was 18 months with a balloon payment at the end. The second document was what he called a cosigner form. He pushed it across the table toward me like it was a birthday card. "It's just to satisfy the lender," he said. "They want a second signature. It doesn't mean anything." I picked it up. I read the first paragraph. Then I read the personal guarantee clause on page 3. "Brendan," I said, "this isn't a cosigner form, this is a personal guarantee. If you default, they come after me. Not jointly, me directly, for the full amount." He waved his hand. "That's just standard language. Lawyers put that in everything. I am the person who reads this language for a living." He smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile that means he'd already decided the conversation would go the way he wanted it to. "Dad already talked to you about this, right?" I set the document down. "No. He said he was going to call you." "He didn't." Brendan leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, like I was the one making things complicated. "Look, the project is solid. The house in Stony Creek, you've seen it. We're 60% through the renovation. I just need bridge financing to get to the sale. 6 months, maybe 8. I pay off the lender. You never hear about it again." "The house in Stony Creek." "Right." Brendan had bought it 2 years earlier with money he said was from savings. I later found out he'd borrowed $85,000 from our parents without telling me, and that the renovation had already gone $60,000 over budget, because he'd hired a contractor who was a friend of a friend, and hadn't pulled proper permits on 2 of the 3 bathrooms. I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew was the document in front of me. "I can't sign this," I said. His expression didn't change right away. There was a pause, a long one, where I could hear the refrigerator humming and the sound of someone's TV through the floor, above us. Then he said very quietly, "You know what your problem is? You've always thought you were smarter than everyone." I told him I wasn't trying to be smart. I was trying to be honest. "You have a stable income. You own your place. This costs you nothing unless I fail, and I'm not going to fail." Brendan, I work with people who said exactly that. Good people. People who had solid plans. And when the balloon came due, they couldn't refinance and the lender called the guarantee. And those people lost everything they had. He gathered the documents. He did it slowly, the way people do when they want you to feel the weight of their disappointment. At the door he turned around and said, "I'll tell Dad you said no. That's fine, he's not going to be happy." I held the door open. "I know." My dad called the next morning at 7:45. I was still in bed. I saw his name on the screen, and I answered because I always answer. He didn't lead into it. He said, "Your brother needs your help and you turned him away." I sat up. I told him what the document actually was. I used plain language, the kind I use with clients who have never seen a financial agreement before. I explained personal guarantee. I explained balloon payment. I explained what variable interest at 14.9% does to a $340,000 principal over 18 months if the sale doesn't close on time. My dad was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're overthinking this." "I'm not overthinking it, Dad. This is my job. Your brother is family. I know he's family. That's why I'm not going to sign something that could cost me my home and my professional license." There it was. In Ontario, licensed insolvency trustees are regulated by the Federal Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy. If I sign a personal guarantee and default on it, if a creditor pursues me and I can't pay, I risk losing my license, my livelihood, my entire career, which took me 7 years of study and articling to build. My dad didn't know that detail. Or maybe he did and it didn't move him. What he said was, "I thought we raised you to put family first. I didn't know what to say to that. I said, I have to get to work, and I got off the phone. I sat on the edge of my bed for a few minutes. I want to be accurate about how I felt. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something smaller and older, the feeling of being looked at by your own family and found slightly lacking. Found a little too cautious, a little too careful, a little too concerned with the fine print. Like caring about consequences made me cold. I went to work. I sat across from a 53-year-old woman who had co-signed a loan for her son 4 years earlier and was now facing wage garnishment. I helped her. I did my job. And on the drive home I thought about Brendan's face when he said I always thought I was smarter than everyone. I've never thought I was smarter. I just learned to read the documents. 3 weeks passed. Brendan didn't call. My dad texted twice. Once to ask if I'd reconsidered, once to forward me a link to an article about the Stony Creek housing market, as if real estate prices were the point. My mom called on a Sunday, and we talked for 40 minutes about everything except the loan, which told me she already knew and had decided to stay out of it. I told myself it had blown over. Then on a Thursday evening in late October, I was at my kitchen table, grading a professional development module I'd been contracted to write for a credit counseling association. It was almost 9. There was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole. It was Brendan. I opened the door. He was in his work jacket, the one he wears on job sites, and he smelled like cold air, and something I couldn't identify. He said, "Can I come in?" Something made me leave the chain on. I don't know exactly what. An instinct maybe. Or just the fact that it was 9 at night and he hadn't called first. I said through the gap. "What's going on?" The lender pulled the loan. They found out about the permit issue on the Stony Creek property. I need you to talk to them. As a professional. Tell them the project is viable. Brendan, I can't advocate to a private lender on your behalf. That's not what I do. You know people. You know how this works. I know how it works well enough to tell you that if they've already called the loan, you need an insolvency lawyer, not me." His voice changed. It went flatter. "So you're useless to me." I didn't respond to that. "Do you know what Dad had to do to help me with the down payment on that house? He pulled from their retirement savings. If this falls apart, that's on you." I felt something cold move through my chest. Not fear, something more like clarity. "That's not on me, Brendan. That was a decision he made without telling me. The family needed you, and you said no." I said no to a document that could have bankrupted me. He pushed against the door, not hard, not at first. I stepped back. He pushed again and the chain snapped out of the bracket. I don't know if he meant for that to happen. I want to be fair about what I remember. And what I remember is the sound of the chain giving way. And Brendan's face, which didn't look like my brother's face. He was in my apartment and he was shouting, and then he grabbed my arm, my left arm, and shoved me into the wall beside the entryway table. My elbow hit the corner of the table. I heard something, a sound I didn't understand, and then I understood it because I couldn't move my arm the way I normally move my arm. Brendan stopped. He looked at me. He looked at my arm. He said, I wasn't trying to. And then he left. I stood in my entryway for a long moment. I looked at the broken chain on the door frame. I looked at my arm, which was hanging slightly wrong and producing a steady, solid pain. I picked up my phone and I called 911. I did not drive anywhere. I sat on the floor just inside my door and I waited, and the dispatcher stayed on the line with me, and I told her what had happened as clearly as I could. The paramedics came first. Then 2 officers from Hamilton Police. My elbow was fractured, a radial head fracture, which the ear doctor told me is common in falls, but also in the kind of impact I'd described. My arm was splinted, and I was admitted for observation. Because I'd also hit the back of my head against the wall, not hard enough to lose consciousness, but hard enough that they wanted to watch me overnight. I gave my statement to the officers in the emergency department. I told them about the loan. I told them about the broken chain. I told them about my arm. One of the officers asked if I had any security footage. I said I had a video doorbell. I'd installed it 2 years ago after a package was stolen from the hallway. I gave them my login credentials. My brother called me twice while I was in the hospital. I let both calls go to voicemail. My dad called once. My mom called once. I let those go too. The next morning, a friend of mine, I'd met her through a professional association years ago, and she'd become the kind of person I call when things are actually serious, came and sat with me while the hospital processed my discharge. Her name is Odalis. She brought me a coffee from the Tim Hortons in the lobby, and she sat in the chair beside the bed and she didn't say anything for a while, which was exactly right. "Are you pressing charges?" she asked eventually. "Yes," I said. "Good. My family is going to say I'm making it worse." "Your family," she said, "broke your arm." She wasn't wrong. It's the way I've come to think about it too. Not just Brendan who swung the door and grabbed my arm, but the whole architecture of pressure that put him at my door that night, believing I owed him something. Believing that my professional judgment, my financial security, my license, my body, all of it was available to his project if he just pushed hard enough. Brendan was charged with assault causing bodily harm. In Ontario, that carries a maximum of 10 years in federal prison. Though the Crown's position from the start was that the likely outcome, absent a trial, would be something significantly less. The doorbell footage showed him arriving, showed the door movement, showed him leaving. It didn't capture the interior, but the timing was consistent with my account, and the ER photos were part of the disclosure package. He hired a lawyer, so did I. Not for the criminal matter, which the Crown handles, but because within 2 weeks of the incident, I received a letter from the private lender's legal representative. They had obtained my name from somewhere, from the loan documents, I assumed. Maybe Brendan had listed me as a reference, or they'd found the unsigned guarantee form and decided to fish. The letter suggested I might have some exposure related to representations made by my brother. I want to be clear. I had never signed anything. I had never spoken to the lender. I had no legal exposure whatsoever. My lawyer, a woman named Constance who had been doing civil litigation in Hamilton for 22 years, and whose patience for nonsense was visibly limited, sent a response that was 2 paragraphs long and made this apparent. We never heard from that firm again. The criminal matter took 7 months. Brendan's lawyer made arguments about the ambiguity of the doorbell footage, about the nature of the doorway interaction, about his state of mind. The Crown had the footage, the ER records, the splint, the fractured elbow, and my statement. Eventually Brendan pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of common assault. He received a conditional discharge with 18 months of probation and mandatory anger management counseling, and a no-contact order that covered me and my home address. I sat in the courtroom and watched him sign the undertaking. He looked at me once. I don't know what I expected to feel. What I felt was tired. My parents didn't come to the courthouse. My mom texted me the evening after the sentencing and said, "I hope this is over now." I didn't respond. My dad called 3 days later and said he thought I should understand that the family had gone through a very difficult time. I listened to the whole thing. Then I said, "I have a fractured elbow and a broken door chain." What did the family go through? He didn't have an answer for that. The call ended. I want to tell you about the winter after all of this, because I think that's the part nobody tells you about. The criminal process, the civil letter, the hospital. Those are events. They have edges. The winter was different. I live alone. I'd lived alone for 5 years before this, and I'd always liked it. The quiet, the particular shape of a day you organize yourself. But that winter the quiet was different. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and lie there thinking about the chain on the door. About the sound my arm made. About my dad saying, "I hope you understand what the family went through." I started talking to a therapist in January. Her name is Dr. Elaine Marchetti and she works out of a clinic near downtown Hamilton, and she is, without exaggeration, one of the best decisions I've made in years. She said something in our 3rd session that I've thought about almost every week since. She said, "Sometimes the grief in these situations isn't about what happened. It's about what you finally had to stop pretending wasn't true." I had to stop pretending that my parents treated me the same as Brendan. I had to stop pretending that their retirement savings being tied to his bad decisions was something I could fix by signing my name. I had to stop pretending that the pressure I'd felt my whole adult life to smooth things over, to be the reasonable one, to make accommodations. I had to stop pretending that was normal. It wasn't. It was a pattern, and I'd been so deep inside it that I almost couldn't see the shape of it until it broke my arm. The Stony Creek house went into power of sale in February. The private lender took possession through the courts. Brendan's equity, what remained of it after the legal costs and the outstanding principal, was minimal. My parents absorbed a loss on the money they'd lent him. I found this out not from them but from my dad's sister, my aunt, who called me in March, and who was, I should say, the only member of that generation of my family who called to ask how I was doing rather than to tell me how I should be feeling. She said, "Your father knows he should have handled this differently. He won't say it, but he knows." I appreciated her saying that. I don't know if it's true. What I know is that in April, Brendan sent me a letter through his lawyer's office. This was required to be via third party because of the no-contact order. The letter said he was sorry for what had happened. It was 4 sentences long. It didn't mention the loan, or the documents, or the things he said at my door, or the fact that he'd told our father I was to blame for the family's losses. 4 sentences, signed with his full name, like I might not know who it was from. I kept the letter. I keep it in the same file as the ER discharge paperwork, and the doorbell footage export I made the night of the incident, and the 2-paragraph letter from Constance that ended the lender's fishing expedition. I keep them together because they tell a complete story. Every document in that file is a thing that happened, and everything that happened is provable. That's the part that still matters to me. Not because I need to prove anything to anyone, but because for most of my life, I was told I was being too careful, too technical, too focused on fine print. As it turned out, the fine print was the only thing standing between me and losing everything. I'm back to work now. I've had a complicated year, professionally. Clients notice when you're distracted. And I was distracted. But I've also had some of the most clarifying conversations of my career, because I understand in a different way now what it means to sit across from someone and tell them they have to stop protecting the people who put them here, that it's not betrayal to refuse to go down with someone else's ship. That saying no to a document is not the same as saying no to a person. Audalis and I have dinner roughly once a month. We talk about work, about the city, about her kids. Sometimes we talk about what happened and sometimes we don't. Last November, she came with me to an art show at the Workers' Arts and Heritage Center on Stewart Street. I'd been meaning to go for 2 years and kept not going. And we stood in front of a series of photographs for a long time without saying anything. And it was one of the better evenings I'd had in recent memory. My arm healed. The fracture was uncomplicated. The physio was straightforward. And my grip strength is essentially what it was before. I mention this because when I tell people the story they always ask. And because it matters to me that my body came back from what happened to it. I have a new door chain. I have a better doorbell camera, one with a wider field of view. I also have a habit now of looking through the peephole before I open anything. Not out of fear, exactly, but out of respect for what I've learned. Some doors you open without thinking. Some doors you should look at first. My relationship with my parents is formal and infrequent. I see them at the occasions that require it. My dad shakes my hand and my mom hugs me and we talk about the weather and the food, and it's not the worst thing in the world. It's just accurate. It took me a long time to understand that accurate doesn't have to be cruel. You can love people and still see them clearly. You can grieve what a family was supposed to be and still show up to Christmas dinner, because grief and presence can coexist. Brendan and I have not spoken since the courtroom. His probation has ended. I don't know what he's doing, I don't look. What I have is the job I built, the friends I chose, the apartment I paid for with money I earned, in a city I moved to deliberately, in a life that is mine in a way that sometimes still surprises me. The way a room surprises you when you've rearranged all the furniture and the light falls differently, and it takes a moment to remember. This is still your place. It's still my place. I didn't sign anything. I kept it.